But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauren Hurl, and I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Conservation Voters. And I've been at VCV for about 7 years. And this is an annual event we host to release the Environmental Common Agenda. And usually it's something that we have a lot of fun with at the State House. And this is our first and hopefully last virtual version of this event. But again, really appreciate people hopping on a Zoom at 5:30 in the evening to learn about the 2021 Environmental Common Agenda. And I just wanted to start off by acknowledging, as we all know, we are living through incredibly challenging times. We have the ongoing public health crisis, attacks on our democracy, a long overdue reckoning with racial justice, and the climate crisis. And we also have an economy that's leaving far too many Vermonters struggling to put food on their table and far too many businesses struggling to stay afloat. So recognizing all of this, we put forward a suite of investment and policy solutions that we believe are responsive to these many challenges we're facing. And if implemented, we believe they'll create a healthy, more equitable, and more resilient Vermont. So I'll briefly walk us through what we have planned for tonight. Sheldon Goodwin, VCV's Political Outreach Associate, is going to share a brief background on the Common Agenda and the partners who are involved in creating it. Then we're going to walk through the key issues that we have identified as our 2021 priorities. And after we walk through the priorities, we're going to be presenting the Vermont Conservation Voters Lifetime Achievement Award to the wonderful Mary Sullivan, a longtime champion and friend. And then we're going to go into small breakout groups, so you'll have a chance to connect with each other, meet some new people, or reconnect with friends, something we're all missing these days. And in those breakout groups, you can share your thoughts, priorities, questions. We'll get back together briefly, and then again, aim to have you out of here by 6:30. And just wanted to note that tonight we're going to give an overview of the issues. We are also creating longer issue briefings over the coming weeks. So there will be plenty of chance. You can, reach out to me anytime and ask questions, but we are also going to do some deeper dives into the issues. So bring your questions to those, get in touch. I would like to welcome Brian Shoup to now say a couple words, and then I'm going to be turning it over to Sheldon.
Yeah, and just a couple. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces. I wish we were all at the Cedar Creek room, but hopefully next year. Just so folks, if you don't know, I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Natural Resources Council. We were founded in 1963, and we work across a very broad range of public policy issues. We work on climate and energy, on transportation, on community development and land use planning, on water quality, on forest health, and on toxics reform. And we work with a lot of different partners, many of whom you will hear from tonight. But first and foremost of our partners is Vermont Conservation Voters. For the past 7 years, we've had a very formal relationship with them where we're able to share resources and staff and office space. And we entered into that partnership in order to really add capacity to both organizations. And it's really been a successful partnership. So you should feel free to reach out to either Lauren, me, or any of the VNRC or VCV staff on the whole range of policies that we deal with. An important example of that partnership and the capacity that it's added is the way that we put together the Common Agenda now, which includes not only VNRC and VCV, but a range of other groups working on the similar issues that we are. And I'm going to turn it over to Sheldon to talk about the Common Agenda.
Thanks, Brian. So Vermont Conservation Voters advocates for legislation that will ensure Vermont offers a bright future for our children and our grandchildren. Our vision for a bright future for Vermont includes working to advance and defend policies that protect the environment and promote health, while advancing civil rights, social, economic, and racial justice, and strengthening our democracy. So each year, VCV publishes the Vermont Environmental Common Agenda of legislative priorities. The agenda represents the priorities of a range of environmental organizations across Vermont working on matters affecting our shared natural resources, the character of our communities, and the health of Vermonters. We are happy to share the 2021 Environmental Common Agenda with you this evening. The Common Agenda is an annual project spearheaded by VCV to identify the top priorities of the environmental community. We wanted to thank our partners this year, which are Audubon Vermont, Vermont Action Works Campaigns, Connecticut River Conservancy, Conservation Law Foundation, Lake Champlain Committee, Preservation Trust of Vermont, Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, Vermont Chapter of the Sierra Club, Vermont Natural Resources Council, Vermont Public Interest Research Group, and Vermont Interfaith Power and Light. And also wanted to thank the many organizations and individuals who helped to provide input on this year's Common Agenda. After a brief overview of this year's priorities, you will have a chance to meet some of our partners and hear more about the issues that we're excited to work on this year. Now I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to start our presentation of the issues.
Thank you, Sheldon. So now we're going to have a set of partner groups walking through our key 2021 Environmental Common Agenda priorities. And we'll put a link in the chat to a PDF of it for people who do better reading things at the same time, or feel free to just download it and look at it later. First and foremost, as I started out, as we worked to pull together this year's Common Agenda, we really wanted to be responsive to these unique and challenging times that we're living in, and fundamentally approached the agenda with the belief that if we keep these challenges that people are facing front and center, we know that we can and must fund Vermont's future through strategic investments that are going to help our communities rebuild from the pandemic in ways that are going to make us healthier, more equitable, and more resilient. And in that spirit, our first set of recommendations identify ways that we can help people pay less for their transportation, heating, and electricity costs. And we believe we can do this while also creating jobs and addressing the climate crisis. So we identified strategic investments that we can make through the state budget, transportation bill, and using federal stimulus dollars. These include things that can help Vermonters save money and have more options for getting where they need to go by significantly increasing investments in programs such as those included in the Transportation Modernization Act, H94. For example, we can make Vermont public transit free over the long term and electrify our bus fleets. We can provide direct incentives for lower income Vermonters to buy high efficiency used vehicles that are also more reliable and more affordable. And we can provide choices other than driving, such as by investing in improved bike and pedestrian infrastructure. We can also cut costs to heat our homes and small businesses and create good paying union jobs by providing direct incentives to low and moderate income Vermonters to weatherize their homes. We know this is going to save people money on their monthly heating bills, make homes healthier and more comfortable, and we need to invest in workforce training programs so we have the people who can do the energy efficiency and green technology installation that we need. Next, we can also cut electricity costs for homes and businesses. Specifically, we can help people dig out of the crisis right now by helping qualified people and businesses pay off unpaid utility bills. And we can invest in programs that help people access energy efficient products and invest in programs that help low and moderate income people access renewable energy like solar. We recognize that one-time funding opportunities from the federal government, and that includes some of the ideas that Governor Scott put forward in his budget, they can really help spur investments in these programs this year. And at the same time, we also know we need long-term sustainable funding for these programs. One of the things that we're looking into is participation in a just and equitable transportation and climate initiative. This is something that we would really want to do in a way where we would prioritize stakeholder engagement led by residents of historically marginalized communities and ensure that that input is shaping the program design. And lastly, in the climate realm, lawmakers must also continue to provide oversight and support to the Climate Council that was established in the 2020 Global Warming Solutions Act. So this is a really exciting opportunity for looking to the future of climate action for Vermont. And we also wanted to recognize that the planning process must include BIPOC participants and other historically marginalized communities who are not yet well represented in that process. And we are also supporting compensation for participants so that their labor on behalf of the state is paid for. Now I'm going to turn it over to Shayna Casper, who's the Vermont Director of Community Action Works Campaigns, who's going to walk through our next set of issues, which are issues that she's been doing really incredible work on in communities in Vermont and around the country. So take it away, Shayna.
Hey everyone, thank you for the introduction, Lauren, and thanks to everyone. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. My name is Shayna Casper. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Water Program Director and Vermont State Director with Community Action Works Campaigns, formerly known as Toxics Action Center Campaigns, a regional nonprofit that works side by side with grassroots groups fighting pollution threats in their neighborhoods, including communities fighting landfill leachate, incinerator smog, and facilitated a network of 30 communities across the country fighting PFAS contamination in their communities, spurred by the experience in Bennington fighting PFAS drinking water contamination there. And that's really the priority area I'm going to talk about today, protecting public health by reducing people's exposure to toxic chemicals and holding toxic polluters accountable for the harm that they cause. So first, exposure to toxic PFAS chemicals weakens our body's immune systems, causes diseases like cancers, and is reported to reduce antibody response to vaccines, potentially exacerbating the impacts of COVID-19. And lawmakers have an important opportunity to turn off the tap to prevent these harmful chemicals from being brought into our state by banning their widespread use in products like food packaging, firefighting foam, firefighting turnout gear, ski wax, carpets, and rugs. Other states have already taken many of these steps, and retailers and restaurants are moving in this direction. And Vermont can take action to ensure our residents are better protected from these harmful chemicals. So the second thing is waste. So exposure to PFAS through products that we use is only one part of the problem. Their disposal contaminates our communities as well. So after PFAS chemicals are imported into our state and the products we buy and use, they continue to cause problems downstream in our wastewater systems by contaminating the leachate from our landfills, as well as sludge that has been spread onto farmlands. So lawmakers should require the state to find better ways to handle PFAS contaminated sludge, particularly because we know these chemicals are long lasting and mobile once they're in their environment and can contaminate our water supplies and our wildlife. And lawmakers should also provide oversight of the Agency of Natural Resources rulemaking around regulating PFAS chemicals in Vermonters' drinking water and surface water to ensure that public health is prioritized. And finally, holding polluters accountable, really coming to the core of it. Legislators should enact legislation to ensure corporate polluters pay for the harm that they cause, rather than the taxpayers or victims. And by allowing Vermonters to access medical monitoring for diseases linked to this toxic contamination, we can ensure that people exposed to harmful chemicals can catch diseases as early as possible, and that the burden of the medical care should be covered by the entity that caused the chemical exposure. So that's all that I wanted to cover today. Next, I'd like to turn it over to mentor and role model, Kaya Morris, who does incredible work, personally keeping my feet on the ground, my head in the stars, to talk about legislature advancing environmental justice and equity initiatives. So take it away, Kaya.
My gosh, thank you so much for that incredible introduction. And it's just amazing to be able to have stayed in community with so many of you. And Shayna, from the beginning, so awesome to see you all. Hi, my name is Kaya Morris, and I am the Movement Politics Director for Rights and Democracy Vermont and a commissioner with the Vermont Commission on Women. So I'm really grateful to join you all tonight about this agenda and in honoring my former colleague and friend, Mary Sullivan. Again, it's so good to see you all, and it's great to see you, Mary. Now, I know there's some people as well who may be new or unfamiliar with rights and democracy, so I'm going to take the quickest of moments to share with you a little bit of a history of who we are and why I'm here in this conversation. So Rights and Democracy, which we call RAD for short, and our sibling organization, the Rights and Democracy Institute, were founded in 2015 on the theory of change, that it takes people power year after year to make the kind of big, bold, long-term changes that we want to see in this country and in this state, very much so in line with what we have in this agenda. And that theory of change, it's centered on the fact that it takes a political infrastructure, and in our case, particularly a membership organization, a statewide membership organization, to sustain that momentum, to do the work throughout and in between elections. And so our members and staff work on a wide range of issues that matter, and we organize for policy change on both the state, local, and national level, and recruit and train a pipeline of progressive candidates to run for office who will help to lift up the work that we are all trying to do today. So this is what we know. Our current systems are deeply dysfunctional, rooted in historical oppressions, and they're fragile. And when those fragile systems break, it's Vermonters who have been systemically kept out of places of power that are the most impacted. Abenaki and Indigenous persons, racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQIA individuals, individuals with disabilities, senior citizens, our new Americans and migrant community, youth, young adults, our poor and working poor. They're the ones who carry the weight of these policies and systems gone wrong. And on the federal level, we're working to try to change that as well, using and promoting the Thrive Agenda, which is the next generation of comprehensive reform that was birthed from the transformative work of the Green New Deal. So how does this all fit in? Well, regionally, Rights and Democracy Institute has joined over 150 organizations across New England who are joining forces to bring together a shared agenda that amplifies the power and the will of the people, and have formed the Renew New England Alliance to push forth bold structural change across all 6 states. And I'm proud to share with you that Vermont's call to action, Vermont Renews, is a new and growing coalition of leading grassroots organizations, labor unions, racial justice groups, frontline communities, and environmental advocates, including groups like the Racial Justice Alliance, 350 Vermont, Vermont AFL-CIO, Sunrise, NOFA, Community Action Works, Champlain Valley DSA, BPIRG, the members of the Vermont Relief Collective, members of Rejoice, Migrant Justice, and so much more. And we've really come together similarly around a similar agenda to try to address our state's overlapping crises, our mass unemployment, racial injustice, the coronavirus pandemic, and climate change. So currently we have over 57 different elected officials across Vermont, from your high bailiffs all the way up to Congressman Welch, who signed on to this vision, which gives us a hopeful cohort of the willing to get this work done and to get it done right. So this is what you also need to know, that globally a haunting truth must be reckoned with and addressed, that people of the global majority are BIPOC and are poor, bear the largest negative impacts of the environmental crises, yet are the least contributors to the crisis itself. And we believe strongly that any solutions proposed should be designed to help heal and restore these communities as an intentional priority rather than a hopeful aspiration of a trickle-down approach. So we're addressing this head on through the formation of a BIPOC-centered advisory group of experts to help guide this process and the policy proposals, as many mentioned here, that will help us to reach our climate goals. And together, in collaboration with our statewide coalition, we're working on comprehensive policies that are unapologetically centered in environmental and racial justice. We're building on a collective voice that, as Lauren had mentioned, we feel is missing from our current conversations and deliberations on solutions from advocacy organizations and our state government. We are stating a demand that those solutions must be centered on the hopes, dreams, and demands of our most impacted, and that the state must listen and learn from the wisdom of those voices. We recognize and we fight for the importance of meaningful compensation of our BIPOC and marginalized identity folks for providing this deep corrective work on behalf of the state that we love. And we'll vanguard that dignity of those most impacted and center their expertise in our path forward. So our future's not yet written. And this common agenda we're talking about today, it helps build fluency around needed sacred principles. And it's not enough, we recognize. No single body of work could be, but as a living and an iterative document, it gives us a lighthouse in a turbulent sea that we can look to for guidance. So thank you for being a part of this conversation. And we invite you all to join us on this journey towards our collective liberation and a just and sustainable future for all. So it's my pleasure to now welcome John Groveman, who, with Lauren's help, we were throwing down on trying to deal with our PFAS and getting some medical monitoring and holding corporate polluters accountable. I remember those days so deeply. John is the Water and Policy Program Director from the Vermont Natural Resources Council, and he's going to help cover the next set of issues. John, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you, Kai. We miss you in the State House, but that was inspirational, and it's great to have you as an advocate on all these vital issues. That was great, Kaya. So I am John Groveman. I'm the Policy and Water Program Director for the Vermont Natural Resources Council. I'm going to talk about 3 issues on the Common Agenda that deal with broadly land use, conservation, housing, and clean water. So I'll start with land use and Act 250. So Act 250, I think you all know, is Vermont's historic land use law. It's been in place for more than 50 years and has been a cornerstone in keeping Vermont, and strengthening our towns and village centers and protecting our working lands. And over the last 4 years, Act 250 has been under review, looked at for really modernizing and upgrading the law and improving the law from our perspective. There was a 2-year commission on how to improve Act 250, bring it into the 21st century. There was 2 years of intense debate in the legislature, really mostly in the House Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Committee. And sadly, that work did not bear significant improvements as we'd hoped. Partly due, I think, always to the difficulty of the issues around Act 250, but also because of the pandemic that hit us, last spring, and while we were really honing in on some of this vital work. At the end of the day, a bill did pass the legislature, which we think would have improved forest protection in Act 250 and addressed recreational trails, and the governor unfortunately vetoed that bill. So we, expect Act 250 legislation this year. We've already seen the governor's executive order, which unfortunately only addressed one part of the improvements to Act 250 and didn't do it in a way that built upon the work that was done, that there was support for the process changes the governor was proposing. So we're focused this year on, if there is Act 250 debate, we want to build on where we think there's consensus and need and progress we can make now. In particular, improving forest protection. This is an issue that's had a lot of support over many years in the legislature. River corridor protection, something that since Tropical Storm Irene, we've known that we need to do much better on river corridor protection. Planning, really bringing planning back into Act 250. There was a lot of good discussion about ways to move forward on that, and we think that those issues need to continue to be addressed. Climate, Act 250 was enacted at a time where climate change was not a key issue. So building on the work of the Climate Council and recommendations that may come out of there, I think we want to see some action on climate change in Act 250 and equity and diversity. Act 250, like all of our systems, we need to look at them to see how equitable they are. And, we know that it's not meeting our needs like many of our systems. And there were changes that were discussed last year that we'd like to see come back. Another land use, housing, conservation related program has to do with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And this is also a program that was born out of a time where we were seeing a subdivision of land and housing that was being built that was not affordable. We still have an affordable housing crisis in Vermont. Now with COVID and people moving to Vermont as a result of the pandemic, we're seeing similar stresses. And we were pleased to see that the governor is proposing to use some of the money that is out there for COVID relief to fully fund VHCB and the important conservation and housing programs they have. So we're going to advocate to make sure that funding holds and VHCB is fully funded as it always should be. Similarly, we were pleased to see the governor put money into downtown tax credits, also really vital programs to encourage development where we want it in our historic downtowns and village centers and the areas adjacent to our downtowns and village centers, and to build affordable housing in the places we want to grow. So we're going to advocate to keep that funding that the governor has identified. And finally, clean water, always a vital issue in Vermont that gets a lot of attention, as it should. Over the last 5 years now, since Act 64 of 2015 was passed, the Vermont Clean Water Act, we've been fighting to fully fund implementation of that law. And we finally cracked that nut a couple of years ago. And we're on a path to funding the water programs that we need to clean up Lake Champlain and to protect the waters in the other parts of Vermont. And we want to make sure that funding holds. We're very concerned. The budget is never, programs are never funded adequately within a pandemic, even though the financial news has been better than I think some of us feared. We're still we're still concerned that there could be cuts to some of these vital programs and not fully funding of the water programs where the legislature made that commitment. Similarly, coming in the pandemic, so many people are suffering across the state. We know that farmers have suffered as one sector of our economy. There was some relief provided to farmers at the end of the legislature last year. We know this is still an issue. We support providing relief to farmers, but in a way that begins to transition farms from traditional agricultural practices, especially dairy farming, to more organic and sustainable farming practices that are better for clean water and more economically sustainable. We want to see those investments made in a way that are smart, that are looking to the future. They're going to allow us to emerge from this pandemic stronger than before, and not just double down on problems that we've seen. One specific idea we're going to advocate for is something we've called for some time, which is right now there's both water pollution programs that deal with water pollution, both in the Agency of Agriculture and at the Agency of Natural Resources. We've always believed this is redundant. We believe that the Agency of Natural Resources, they're the environmental regulators, not the Agency of Agriculture. They really have a role in marketing farms and supporting them in a different way. So we like to see all those water programs moved out of the Agency of Agriculture into the Agency of Natural Resources. So we'll be advocating for that. And finally, we know that we're not doing enough to protect nature's resources that are some of the best defenses we have against water pollution: wetlands, floodplains, river corridors. And we're advocating to use this pandemic time and the time that we're on Zoom in the legislature to do a deep dive into how we're doing protecting these vital resources. We have data and other experts that we work with that we're losing ground on these important resources. And we're going to urge the legislature, the environmental committees in the House and Senate, to really look at what's the status of protecting these resources and identify gaps in the law, and then hopefully build legislation to address those either later this session or next session, when hopefully we'll all be together again in person. So that is our slate of issues on land and housing and water. And it's my pleasure to turn over the Zoom floor, to Paul Burns, the Executive Director of VPIRG. And Paul's done incredible work for Vermont over the years. And take it away, Paul.
Thank you, John. Thanks so much for that. Thanks for your great work. Appreciate Lauren and VCV and all the partner organizations, and to all of our legislative friends who are hanging in there. You're halfway done with this maybe last Zoom meeting of the day for you. I'm here to talk about two small issues, plastics and democracy. So we'll kick those off rapidly here. Plastics, all of you are familiar with the problem here. We talk about single-use plastics. We're talking about things that are used for just minutes, but they last for virtually forever in the environment, certainly hundreds of years. And so it's a pollution problem. There are also problems associated with how and where plastic is made. It is derived from fracking operations, often in communities that are marginalized communities, cannot tolerate these additional environmental insults. And so when we talk about moving away from plastic, we're not just talking about plastic, we're talking about changing the way we think about our culture a bit, to move back to reusable products, less waste generally. But the focus here that we were talking about with respect to plastics, I will note that plastics, while it doesn't disintegrate, it doesn't biodegrade, it breaks up into tiny, tiny bits. So it's found everywhere from the polar ice caps to your ice cubes at home, literally in your water supply. And so Vermont, 2 years ago, passed legislation that addressed, and was at the time the strongest plastics legislation in the country, that addressed plastic straws, plastic bags, drink stirrers, and expanded polystyrene food wrapping. That law has already had a huge impact. You may not realize it, but we estimate that about 58 million plastic bags have already been saved, were not used because the law took effect in July of last year. That's a tremendous positive result of that legislation. And we know that moving forward, we have a lot more to do in this area. So as we think about plastics and packaging, we know the situation has unfortunately gotten worse during this pandemic, when the plastics industry is now, touting plastics as the new way to stay safe. There are certain uses of plastics we don't deny are important, critically important in a medical sense, but if we can avoid the unnecessary single-use plastics, that's really where we want to see a focus. So we're urging the legislature this year to consider bills that would go after or eliminate certain single-use plastic products, again, to increase the recycled content in certain plastic products like plastic bottles, your Coke and water bottles. If we have to use plastic packaging, let's use more of it again. Let's increase the recycling and recycled content. We want to see more manufacturer responsibility for the plastics and packaging that they create. So they would, for instance, have to make more of it out of recycled materials, make sure that it is recyclable, make sure they're using less of it where they can, and make sure that it is less toxic. And there are ways that we can encourage each of those behaviors. Really fundamentally in this area, one of the other things that we're hoping to do this year, after nearly 50 years, Vermont's bottle bill should be modernized, should include some of the drinks that didn't exist in 1972 when it was passed originally. And so we can add things like those water bottles and hard cider. And we should even add wine. Wine did exist 50 years ago, but it was not included in this law, even though liquor bottles have been included for a long time. That would help us to dramatically increase the recycling of these items. And we keep it out of landfills, keep it out of the environment as well. And there's testimony starting tomorrow in House Natural on this idea of expanding and modernizing the bottle bill. So we're excited about that. Lots more to say there, but we'd be happy to provide you more information if you would like. Next, I'll just very briefly talk about one of the key things we need to do on democracy. So incredibly important right now. And I'm happy to say that Vermont is really going in a direction that is different from you reading headlines where other states are going. Now talking about making it more difficult, adding new hurdles for people to participate in elections and vote. Here, we had the greatest turnout in Vermont's history in November of 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, 45,000 more voters than ever voted before in this state. That was about a 73% turnout, and 4 out of 5 of those voters voted early, most of them voting by mail or dropping it off in the drop boxes at their town clerk's office. That was an incredible turnout, and a lot of that was made possible. Certainly there was strong interest in this election, but a lot of it was made possible by making sure that every active registered voter received a ballot at home. And this process just made it that much easier and certainly far safer for voters and for elections workers as well. We think that that policy should be made permanent in Vermont. After all, why go back on a policy that helped to achieve the greatest voter turnout in history in the state? So that legislation is now being considered in the Senate. We expect the House has a strong interest in this as well. The Senate is due to pass it out of committee by February 19th. Committee chair has said, and I've seen at least one member of the committee on this call earlier. I don't see everybody on my screen, so I'm sorry if there are more of you, but thank you. Thank you. We think that that's really, really important. We want to not only make that vote by mail provision permanent, while preserving the opportunity to vote in person for those who need and want that. We also think there should be a curing provision added. This is a way to fix the ballot if you send it in and it has a problem. Like, for instance, if you forget to sign that inner envelope, that's one key difference from what we'd like to see put in place permanently from what existed last November. So that's it. Lots more to say about democracy, but I think those are the key highlights. And I think I'm turning it back to you, Lauren. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much. And we know we just presented a lot of ideas and a lot of information. You do have in writing again the PDF that lays out these same ideas and concepts. And we also, it's a time of unprecedented challenges and unprecedented opportunities. So there's a lot for us to do. And together we can do big things. And we're really excited to get to work with all of you on trying to make this kind of change happen. Next, I'm going to turn it over to the wonderful Johanna Miller from Vermont Natural Resources Council, who is going to present the VCV Lifetime Achievement Award to Mary Sullivan, who I am so thrilled to honor tonight. We miss you, Mary, but we're so happy to celebrate you and your incredible legacy. So Joey, take it away.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you everyone for showing up and you know, in these teeny weeny screens or teeny weeny boxes on my screen. It's really wonderful to see so many of you. I wish we were together, but I am really glad to be here with you all and so many folks showing up because of the amazing Mary Sullivan in part. So it's really my privilege to present this incredibly well-deserved award to former state representative and lifelong environmental protection and climate justice champ, Mary Sullivan. As most of you likely know well, Mary has dedicated her whole life, her whole self as a mother, wife, partner, and democracy defender to innumerable good causes. Mary spent much of her professional career in the communications field, including nearly 15 years at the Burlington Electric Department. But tonight, again, it's my honor on behalf of Vermont Conservation Voters to say a few words about Mary, who's earning the Vermont Conservation Voters Lifetime Achievement Award this year for her tireless work, in particular, serving 2 different stints as a Vermont House member representing Burlington. In her first legislative stint, starting in the early 90s, Mary played many important roles, including as the chair of the House Natural Resources Committee, where there she championed many environmental protections measures, including at that time and ever since being an ardent defender of Vermont's landmark Land Use and Development Law, Act 250. At that time, and even more so in her second stint as a state representative, serving on the Natural Resources and Energy Committee, on the House Transportation Committee, and for 3 years, serving as co-chair of the Vermont Legislative Climate Solutions Caucus. In each of these roles, Mary has been an unabashed, unwavering advocate for climate action, for environmental protection. Mary put forward the kinds of solutions necessary to tackle the scale of the challenges that we face, like progressive, strong, equitable carbon pricing. She advocated for strong, smart growth and land use policies and programs. She pushed tirelessly for weatherization investments, especially those programs serving the most vulnerable, lower income Vermonters. She advocated for a plastic bag ban and toxic pollution reform, so many of the things that you heard so many of my friends and colleagues speak to earlier, and so much of the work that you are all doing in your different roles. But Mary really pushed hard in many of these uphill battles, and she never gave up. She never wavered, and she certainly never cowed to what was politically possible, and always worked in service of what was planetarily essential. So in one of her last votes on her birthday, Mary voted in support of a critical climate accountability law, the Global Warming Solutions Act. And that is now law, and that law will now require the full and operationalized focus of state government in service of climate action and a just transition. Mary had a huge role in that. So there are far more examples of ways that Mary worked tirelessly as a legislator to ensure clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, healthy, walkable communities with housing choices that serve all people, and a climate-friendly economy. Mary's passion for these issues and for people is palpable. I'm sure you know that for anyone who has the privilege of having had the opportunity to work with Mary. So just being able to recognize her service to the state of Vermont as a legislator over several terms and receiving this VCV Lifetime Achievement Award is so well-deserved. Congrats, Mary. Thank you so much for all you do, all you have done, and all you'll continue to do. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Joey. I don't even know what to say after such an amazing introduction. But it's been such a pleasure being here tonight and looking around and seeing the amazing advocates I've worked with over the years. You know, how do you get work done as a legislator without having people like you folks being there to work with us? We all know that nobody does this work alone, and to have such a strong team was just wonderful. It's also great to see so many of my former colleagues on the Zoom today. I think of so many of the issues that we've worked on over the years. When I saw Mike Gantachka, I thought of the VW settlement money, and when I saw other people, like other things would come up, plastics and toxics and Act 250, and so this is a deep honor for me. My God, I love you all, and thank you from the bottom of my heart.
We love you, Mary, and thank you. An incredible legacy, and we look forward to whatever you have next as well. But thank you. So we are now going to transition, and lots of love in the chat. So make sure you see that. And I got a lovely note from Karen Lafayette I need to put in the chat for you too. So we are now going to transition to breakouts. Given that we went a little long on presentations, I want to go into the breakouts, and I think people can drop off at 6:30, or if you're having a good conversation, you want to stay on, we'll keep it open for a few more minutes, but totally respect that it's a lot of Zoom. So take the time that you want, or just pop off whenever you need. So we can just kind of wrap up here being together, but I hope you get the chance to meet with some fellow legislators, advocates, allies who share a lot of passion and values together. And so I will have Sheldon be setting us up with the breakout group. So it might take a minute to get assigned to one and put into one, so you can stretch for a minute or stand up, grab a drink if you need, whatever. But you'll be assigned into a room very shortly. So thank you all so much for coming. Congrats again to Mary Sullivan. We love you. Mwah! And thank you all for taking the time to be here and hearing about our 2021 Environmental Common Agenda priorities.